Thank you all and welcome. Okay. How many languages can you read? Okay, great. Let's start. I would like to know how many of you here in the room are actually developing or maintaining multilingual websites. Please raise your hands. Wonderful. Nearly everybody. That's good. How many of you are TYPO3 agencies, like on the development side? Okay. How many of you are enterprises or organizations? Okay, just a few. Good. So just that we know what we're dealing with here. Okay, let's start. Just a few words who we are. My name is Daniel Zielinski from Loctimize, a company based in Saarbrücken. And I am working with TYPO3 since about 2003 or 4. And what I usually do is I work as a consultant and trainer in the area of internationalization, localization, and translation, with a focus on strategies, processes, and technologies. So our focus is not just TYPO3. But in TYPO3, we work a lot with multilingual content management and do translation management for enterprise clients or agencies to get the TYPO3 sites multilingual. And in the TYPO3 community, I'm one of the lead members of the Localization Manager team, developing interfaces between TYPO3 and the translation or localization world.
Okay. My name is Joe Hasenau. I come just from the other side, so I come from the TYPO3 side. I just work for Cybercraft Media Manufactory, which is in Klauser-Sellerfeld, Germany. It's a small town in the Upper Harz Mountain with a technical university, which is actually using TYPO3, which is quite good. My Twitter name is @Barmefield, and this is why you see this nice image there. So actually, it's a translation of my last name, so you don't know. You know that it's not meant another way. What I usually do is I'm working as a workbench for TYPO3 agencies and clients with a small company because we don't have too many developers ourselves. We do not large projects ourselves, but we help other people doing their larger projects when they run out of time, when they run into serious problems with TYPO3 they did not imagine to happen, stuff like that. I'm working as a TYPO3 trainer and coach to just teach people how to deal with TYPO3, maintaining extensions like grid elements. Some of you might know it and use it. Themes. Now the Localization Manager, because grid elements had some problems with it, and this is how I came to develop Localization Manager stuff as well. I wrote some TYPO3 books. I'm organizing the TYPO3 User Experience Week together with Petra, which is my wife and boss in my company. So you will see something of this TYPO3 User Experience Week in this talk as well. So our mission for today is to show you first the basic concepts and terminology so that you know what I18N, L whatever N, and T whatever N actually means. We will give you an overview of the history of TYPO3 localization, which is quite long because TYPO3 is well known for being a good translation system and multilingual system in the open source community. We will show you the results of TYPO3, not actually just one TYPO3 User Experience Week, but 3 different TYPO3 User Experience Weeks that took care of localization and translation problems in TYPO3, and the Developer Days of this year. And we will talk about the business impact of the solutions we already have and the solutions we think we should have in the future, and some goals for the upcoming versions, new features for new releases of TYPO3 and the Localization Manager.
Okay. Did you know that only 60% of the world's top global brands are multilingual with an average of 8 languages per website? What does that number tell us? 40% is still not multilingual. Nice. And an average of 8 languages per website, that's quite impressive, right? Who of you here in the room has dealt with websites with more than 10 languages? Okay, that's not too many. Okay, thank you. So, before we get started with the actual things, I want to give some basic terminology here because people very often mix these things up. And globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation, on the client side, but also on the developer side, they're very often mixed up, and people don't really understand what we're talking about. So usually when we're dealing with clients, they all say, well, translation, please translate our website. Yeah, and that means they think of the actual language of the words, and they just want a one-to-one translation of their website. When this is done, they come to the point and see, wow, we do not need certain products or news in these regions. So they start thinking about localization, so adapting the content to the markets, to the regions. Yeah, and here we're not just talking about the text the author is writing, but of course also about the code, the strings that the developers are writing in extensions or wherever. So focus here is on the geographical regions and markets. And very important, we also take into account the cultural background here. Yeah, for example, that you use different colors in designs depending on the region where you are. Yeah, different colors have different meanings, all this kind of stuff. And of course, that also extends to the layouting and design part. And now people, they have the localized web pages and say, wow, that's good, but then still there are some issues. And then they go back one step and say, okay, let's think. Internationalization, have we really done that? Do we have strategies for content, layout and code really prepared to be localized and translated? And yesterday there was a talk in the same room here about content strategies, and this applies here as well. And one of the statements was, you should have a strategy. And guess what? If you need that for one language, you also need that for multiple languages or on the international markets. So you need to prepare your product, services, your website, of course, to be localized and translated. And we've got some numbers later on that show how many people really do that. So here, internationalization, of course, also involves the analysis or taking into account national, international standards, regulations, and jurisdiction. Okay, so you can think of that. Companies are doing globalization, think about how they best do it in internationalization phase, then they adapt the content they have internationalized and finally translate it. This is how it should be done. But I can tell you it always works the other way around with a lot of pain. Okay, so now a little time travel. As we said earlier, TYPO3 was a multilingual system right from the beginning. So when Casper released the system in 2000, it already supported multiple languages. Other systems out there being like globally more popular open source content management systems. You install them, they're not yet multilingual. Yeah, so that was already in there in 2000. And then with the increasing number of international companies onboarding TYPO3, there was a demand for professional support in handling all those languages. Because when you go over 3-4 languages and the amount of content really increases, that cannot be done manually anymore by copying and pasting or working in the backend. You shoot yourself very quickly. So 2 developments took place in parallel, one from Casper and one from our side, to build interfaces to get the translation stuff, the content, out of TYPO3, leave that to the professionals, develop that, and then import that back into TYPO3. Because you cannot teach all the translators how to work with TYPO3. And here, a historic screenshot of how nasty that looked like at the times. You probably cannot really read it if you're sitting in the back, but I can tell you, you as a localization or language manager needed to understand a lot about the table structure in TYPO3 and all this kind of stuff. So very techy. So in 2007 at a TYPO3 conference, then 3 people met, all working on the same topic, and decided to put the development and merge it. Yeah, so out of that came a localization manager that was funded by some clients, and later on in 2008 already deeply integrated with the first translation management system. So actually what you can do these days is you can push a button in TYPO3, get stuff directly to the translators can translate, push another button, it goes back to TYPO3 and the preview is shown. These things are already possible. They were possible already nearly 8 years ago. And the interesting thing is, companies that onboarded TYPO3 at that time, they are still using that solution, and they also stick to TYPO3. But then we had a problem. After TYPO3 version 4.7, somehow the development of the interfaces and language handling, it slowed down a little bit. Version 6 came up, then version 7. There was a change in the development team, and things really, really slowed down until 2 years ago, when the whole thing took additional development power with people like Joe, and the whole thing like accelerated again. But in the meantime, there is now different solutions out there competing, and we're trying to merge them slowly back into one solution again. So that was what was happening since the beginning, and now we're more or less at today, and I hand over to Joe.
Actually, not really today, but 2 years ago. Because we had the same problems that we had with the Localization Manager after 4.7, we had with TYPO3 itself after 4.7, and other issues after 4.7. So Matis took up the lead of the core team, the TYPO3 core team, and became the product owner. And at that time, we started to reactivate the idea of the User Experience Week, which actually dated back to 2009. And in 2014, we had another User Experience Week up in our hometown, and there were some first concepts that have been made during this User Experience Week, where just people sat there and really made concepts just on paper. No coding, no prototyping, no thinking of frameworks and stuff like that, but just thinking about how can we deal with multiple languages, multiple channels, multiple target groups that we might want to reach with different types of content. And they made just concepts. And in parallel to that, we had another team with Benjamin Kott and Felix Kopp and other people who just started to redesign the backend, which is actually still an ongoing process today, but has been started in 2014 as well. So after that, we had some thing for the railway looking like that. So we actually were able to do something, to think about it, how it could be working, but it was not really ready for production. So the next step was the actual backend redesign, and together with that redesign, we got some new modules to translate stuff in TYPO3. Still, there are some broken features in there, which still have some pending patches in the review tracker. Maybe if you want to take care of that, it might speed up the process a bit. But still, it is a bit awkward to deal with that stuff because we have too many different possibilities and too many different ways how to deal with translations in TYPO3. And so in 2016, we had actually reached that state. It looked already quite good. It was nice and colorful, but still a bit slow and a heavy train. So we wanted to get further. In 2016, Matis came up and said, okay, we have another user experience week here, and now we want to get into the dirty stuff, and we want to take care of how things actually should be done in the future, because we want to show the people why we did stuff in CMS 7 like that, and why we want to go on in a different way than we did before. So we had another team, and now we did a deep analysis of the localization mode chaos we had in TYPO3 still with CMS 7, because in CMS 7 there is something that works already with 2 tracks, but we have some other problems. So 2 tracks means you have a translation mode, so-called, which is actually one-to-one translation and is connected to the default language, and the default language has the lead. And the other track is you have a free mode where you can do whatever you like in the translated content, so you are not connected to the default language. So these are the 2 tracks basically, but still you might need some mixed up stuff to deal with that stuff. So we have this interface where you can choose between the modes, and as soon as you did that, you actually stuck to it, and you have to deal with that on that page. Otherwise, you have to delete the content, get back. It's still a bit awkward, but it works more streamlined. So you don't have this mix-up still in, that we had in the back in the past, where you can have different modes that for the front end, for the back end, you have no definite lead in the default language, but you can do whatever you like. You can insert content in between other contents, and when you sort it, you don't actually know where it will be going and stuff like that. So what we want to get rid of is this switch. This switch is called Allow Inconsistent Language Handling. And Marta said to me that this is on purpose, that it's that long, because when you write it, you should know that you do something really bad. Yeah? Don't do it. If you can avoid it, don't use it. It's still possible so that you can deal with stuff that has been dated back to 6.2 or even earlier versions, but this will be removed in the future. So we have to do something about that and find solutions for that. One of the solutions that we came up with is a wizard, so that you can switch between the two modes and say, okay, I was in the free mode, I don't have connections to the default language anymore, but I want to connect them back, the elements, because I did something wrong. So this can be easily done with such a wizard, so you don't have to go to each and every content element to deal with that. And we even had to think about more complex things. This is not to show you the actual data structure, but to show you the complexity that might be your problem when you deal with multiple related tables. This is just for files and metadata. And you have to think about how to translate stuff. When you translate a content element, how do you want to translate the file? Do you translate the file content, just the metadata or whatever, and how you want to solve that in all these tables. This is the goal. This is where we want to be in the future. We want to have a fast train, we want to have a maximum of 2 tracks, and we want to have a modern solution. And this is where you can back in again.
Okay, so maybe to sum up that from a different perspective. What our clients all want to do is they either want to translate stuff one-to-one, which is that connected mode that we have in TYPO3 and always had. But we also have these clients that want to do actual localization. So they don't want to translate one-to-one, but they want to make exceptions for certain parts of the content. And this is now possible on a page level. So you can decide for each page whether it should be a one-to-one translation or whether actually the page itself deviates from the default language in the system. And you can then say, okay, this, for example, is for an Italian subsidiary company, and they will manage that part themselves. So you localize it, you can still translate it, but then the translation loses the connection at the moment with the original content. So it can be, for example, rearranged in the back end or front end. You can change the position, the sorting, or you can just hide one part that is not relevant for the market. That was also possible in the past with previous versions, but what happened is that there was always that connection to the default language content. So when you started reordering, for example in Russian, a content element, or better say like in the default language, you started reordering it. In all languages, the ordering changed again. And of course, the manager, the localization or translation manager of a site could not go and then check out 10 plus languages whether something had moved and correct that manually. So this is one of the issues that has been addressed here, and the two-way track solution actually now allows that, or these user scenarios. Okay?
Just to be more precise, it's not just about pages, but about languages as well. So you can define per page and language combination if you want to be in the connected mode or in the free mode. So you can even deal on the same page with different behaviors for different languages or target groups. So you're not fixed to deal with the same principle on just one page.
Okay, so now you're all sitting here and we see we've got a great audience here, and of course we wonder, why are you here? Hopefully because of this, because there is some business impact in the whole thing. Today, I think multi-language support or a good localization and internationalization support is a requirement when people choose a content management system. And I myself, I also work with other content management systems, sometimes analyze them, and I now can really say, from the open source world, there is no system that can compete in multi-language support with TYPO3. Prove me if I'm wrong, you can try. But we have tested so many systems, and we can say it works out of the box, it can be configured nicely, you can build nice solutions around that, and it's really easy to get stuff translated. Okay? So now, let's look at that business impact. How many people of you are doing internationalization testing before you start translating a website? Please raise your hands. No one.
Okay.
That's cool. It's our clientele. Oh, there's one in the very back. Yeah, but this is a client of ours, isn't it? Yeah, I think. Okay. Okay, now. So that's interesting. Nobody does that. Well.
Can you explain what is it?
Okay, that's a good question. Maybe you don't know what it is. So, for example, make sure that when you translate a web page, you can be sure that everything works. That all translations will be shown, that the date formats, for example, in the news, will be shown correctly, that you actually make sure that the extensions that you use really work out nicely, and so on and so forth. How many people of you really test that? Now I probably see some more hands. Still, maybe 10% in the room, not more. Good. I'm happy about this. And now, those people who have raised their hands, how many of you really check every extension they use, whether they coded it themselves or whether they just use the third-party extension? Did you really check whether these are internationalized and the content and whatever these things do can be translated easily?
Before you start translating.
Yeah, always before. So it's maybe 5, 6, 7 people in the room. Okay, 7.5, 8. That's not much. Okay, so I can tell you something. What we do is we do these kind of tests, and 90% or more of the internationalization tests that we do for agencies or for the clients directly fail. What does this mean? It means the client you're working for says, hey, get that page translated. You say, yeah, okay. It gets translated, and then comes the big problem. There was an extension out there called shadow galleries, nicely displaying some images with some captions there. After translation of a website, everything was gone. There were no galleries anymore. A different extension had no captions anymore because they simply could not be translated. Okay, that of course, we found it out when the website was like 2 days before the launch. It's not our problem. We just got in a special operations unit trying to fix this. Yeah, but the delay this caused for the client for the launch of the website, at the end, to get this fixed was several days, for others several weeks, depending on how big the fuck up was in development. Yeah, and they could have seen that at the very early stage. So I have one interest here. Tell you, do internationalization testing before you get out. Yeah, before you even start translating. Because fixing that at the end, once the stuff is translated and you don't get it back in, yeah, it's going to cost you per language an awful lot of money and time.
Actually, you should even start before delivering the default website. Because when you think about responsive web design, and you have languages which have much longer titles, for example, and they don't fit in the box, it looks ugly. And if it looks ugly and it's a web shop, you will lose possible clients in that country or in that region or speaking that language. So actually you should test this internationalization. Yeah, now you know why it's I18N. You should test that before you actually deliver the default website. This would be the best case, actually.
Okay, those of you who are developing websites, how many of you do plan translation budgets? So everything that related to translation. Okay, I see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 hands, 11. Not too many. Okay, before you start creating the content, I mean, how many hands do I see now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5. Why would you do that? Why would you start planning a budget before you start writing content? It's obvious, isn't it? Because if you start writing an awful lot and then face the challenge that you don't have the budget to translate the whole thing, sorry, that's what happens very often. And those of you here dealing with multilingual web pages, how many of you do really plan time and money for the translation management just on the TYPO3 side? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a little bit more. Okay, do you know how much time that really takes? We have measured that a little bit over time. And on average, we came up with 4.3 minutes per page and language that our clients spend just for the management, meaning getting the content out, getting it to the translators, getting it back, checking it, and everything. So that doesn't sound like much, 4 minutes, right? But now let's talk about a client that has 70 pages and 20 languages. Very often, they have not planned the adequate time to do that. So they either launch the multilingual website without checking it, happens, or they have this wonderful delay, like one of our clients who has the web page translated into Chinese, Korean, and it's there for a year now. It has not been published because they didn't have the time and they did not even think about getting this stuff reviewed. Cool, isn't it? So, now, this was some stuff that happens in real life. What do we need to do in the future to get rid of that and make TYPO3 even better in this area? Here you go, Joe.
Yep. Actually, what we already do is what we showed at the User Experience Week. We went with the results to the TYPO3 Developer Days, and we had some research sessions there, which is actually giving us the results shown before, that people do know about the technical tools they have and about the Localization Manager extension, but not about the workflow. And still, they have some serious problems to deal with. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have a better user interface for translation management tasks, so that you don't have to deal with the techie stuff, writing configurations, exporting XML stuff, and then checking the XML just by hand or by whatever, and then sending it to somewhere. So everything should be automated, and the interface should be just great. Actually, this is a prototype that we, not really a prototype, actually this is available in production with a separate extension made for a translation service provider who is actually connecting translation services and content management systems like Drupal, WordPress, and they wanted to connect TYPO3 as well. So we did that for them, and parts of that will be re-implemented into the Localization Manager because this makes sense, because it's useful for each and every possible connector that we might write. If you're interested, you can see that outside, because we will have another talk at the expo stage where you see have a presentation. I will be around, and then I can show you the live preview of this interface. The other thing is we want to get compatible to TYPO3 CMS8 methods and user interfaces, because they did a lot in that area. So it's already a touchable interface you can use on a tablet. And of course, the localization management should be possible there as well, because I met some other, visited some other talks, and people told me that they're actually using tablets in the train to do stuff to save time, and actually translation reviewing and stuff like that could be done on a tablet as well. So we have to make it compatible to CMS8. You can already use it, actually. The 7 version should be more or less compatible. It's available in the Git repository. You can check that. If you have some serious issues, you can just report them on Slack or on Forge, and we will take care of it more or less immediately, because we are currently working on that. And there's another goal, to just cast all that stuff that we present today and we talk about today in a more or less best practice documentation, how to deal properly with localization, not just in TYPO3, but in your website projects, maybe even with other content management tools, so that you don't run into the problems that we pointed out before. So if this does sound like a plan to you, this is actually our current track we are already on. The train is not that as modern as I showed in the other image, but we are still working on it. And if you want to help us, if you want to join us, you can support the project with money or workforce. And the things you can do is sponsor-specific features. If you need something, we can do that for you. As, for example, this interface that I already showed you. You can sponsor one or more participants for the next user experience week because we want to do something about localization there. Definitely, because we have to do it now and make it real, not just make concepts and think about it, but really get into interfaces, into coding, into stuff like that. You can host a code sprint where we can make the translation of TYPO3 itself better, not just the localization manager, because we have other problems with workspaces and localization and translation. We have problems with related content structures over several tables with inline relational record editing and stuff like that. So we need code sprints where we can deal with that. Was this just for the pronunciation or for the idea? And of course you can join the team, because currently the team is quite large when you just look at the list of people on Forge, but actually the active people are quite a few. We need more people to help us there with interface, with coding, with JavaScript or CSS stuff and other things. So you actually can join the team, and we are getting into action again and back on track again. So the snail you saw in one of the images before is gone now. If you want to get in contact, I don't know if it's readable in the back. Twitter @Bunnyfield should be something you can remember. The other one is @Loctimize, and the email addresses are there, so you can contact us directly. And actually, this would be the end, unless you have some questions.
So hi,